30 seconds can change a life. Zecora was barely old enough to understand what motherhood would demand when she stood before the man who promised to love her forever. "I am pregnant," she whispered. Emeka stared at her, then said the words that would haunt her for years. "I am not ready to be a father." He walked away, leaving her with nothing but fear and an unborn child. Her parents did not comfort her. They called her a disgrace and forced her out before sunrise. With nowhere to go, Zecora held her stomach and made one promise: her baby would never feel unwanted. She would work, suffer, and sacrifice anything necessary to give him a future. Years later, that abandoned baby would become a wealthy businessman. But wealth would not heal the wound his father left behind. And when a beautiful woman entered his life claiming to love him, his mother decided to discover the truth before her son made the biggest mistake of his life. What she uncovered would expose greed, loyalty, and a love nobody expected. For them, this was only the beginning. And the next chapter was already waiting. Zecora left her village carrying one small bag and a much bigger burden. She had no husband, no money, and no family willing to take her back. Every step felt like punishment, but she kept moving because the child inside her needed her. She found a tiny room in a crowded neighborhood and accepted every job she could find. She washed clothes, cleaned houses, carried heavy loads, and sold fruit in the market. Some days she ate only enough to keep herself standing. Other days she gave her last food to the baby growing inside her. When labor finally came, there was nobody beside her except an elderly woman who heard her cries and helped. A baby boy was born. Zecora looked at him through tears and whispered, "Your name is Chinedu." She promised him that his beginning would never decide his ending. She did not know how difficult the road ahead would become, but she knew one thing: she would never abandon him the way his father had abandoned them. And the next chapter was already waiting. And the next chapter was already waiting. And from that day forward, they chose truth instead of fear. Chinedu grew up watching his mother turn exhaustion into strength. Whenever he woke before sunrise, she was already working. Whenever he returned from school, she was waiting with a smile, even if her hands were tired and her feet were swollen. She never taught him to hate his father. Instead, she taught him to respect people, keep his word, and work for what he wanted. As he grew older, Chinedu became brilliant with technology. He built a small payment system for local businesses and slowly attracted investors. His little project became a company called Evergreen Tech Solutions. Success came faster than anyone expected. At 28, Chinedu owned a mansion, expensive cars, and a thriving business. Yet his favorite place remained his mother's small house. He begged her to move into his mansion, but she refused. "I survived without luxury," she told him. "I only want to know that my son has become a good man." Chinedu hugged her, unaware that her next lesson would protect his heart from a dangerous mistake. And that moment changed everything. For them, this was only the beginning. One evening, Chinedu finally told his mother about Cynthia. She was beautiful, fashionable, confident, and always knew how to make an entrance. Chinedu believed she was perfect. He said she was a fashion designer, and that they had been together long enough for him to consider marriage. Zecora smiled, but something inside her remained cautious. She had spent decades watching people judge others by money, clothes, and social position. "Bring her to me," she said. "I don't want to judge her before meeting her." Soon, Chinedu proposed to Cynthia, and she accepted immediately. She spoke about their future, their mansion, and the life they would build together. But Zecora noticed how often Cynthia talked about expensive things. She asked her son one question: "If you lost everything tomorrow, would she still hold your hand?" Chinedu laughed. "Mama, you worry too much." Zecora said nothing. She had learned that love could sound convincing while hiding a completely different intention. What happened next would prove it. And that moment changed everything. Nobody in that room could forget it. A few days later, Zecora was walking home from the market when two thieves tried to snatch her bag. Before she could react, a young woman rushed toward them and shouted for help. The woman was Blessing, a simple secretary who happened to work at Evergreen Tech. She was frightened, but she refused to leave an older stranger alone. The thieves eventually ran away. Blessing helped Zecora gather her scattered belongings and walked her home. She never asked who Zecora was. She never asked for money. She never mentioned that she worked for a wealthy company. She simply said, "Please rest, Ma. You are safe now." Zecora watched her disappear down the street and felt something she had not felt in years, certainty. Later, she discovered that Blessing worked directly under Chinita. That discovery made her think about Cynthia. One woman was trying to enter her son's wealthy world. Another had shown kindness without knowing that world existed. Zecora decided that before the wedding, she would find out which woman truly had a good heart. And from that day forward, they chose truth instead of fear. Zecora told Chinita about Blessing and the way she had helped her. Chinita already knew Blessing as a reliable employee, someone who never missed important details and never complained about difficult work. But he had never considered her as anything more. He described Cynthia as sophisticated and said that Blessing was simply a hardworking secretary. Zecora gently disagreed. "Beauty can attract you," she said, "but character is what stays when beauty and money are tested." Then she proposed an unusual plan. She would move into Chinita's mansion disguised as a maid. Cynthia would believe she was just an older housekeeper. Chinita could observe everything without warning his fiancée. At first, he thought the idea was unnecessary. But Zecora insisted. "I am not trying to destroy your relationship," she said. "I am trying to make sure you know who you are marrying." Finally, Chinita agreed. His mother entered the mansion under a new name, wearing plain clothes and carrying herself like a servant. The truth was closer than anyone realized. The truth was closer than anyone realized. Cynthia moved into the mansion to prepare for the wedding. The first time she saw the new maid, she barely looked at her. "Take my bags upstairs," she ordered. Zecora quietly obeyed. She watched as Cynthia criticized the smallest things: the arrangement of flowers, the temperature of the room, the food on the table. Chinita noticed the behavior but tried to convince himself that his mother was overreacting. Then Cynthia began speaking to Zecora as if she were invisible. When the maid served water, Cynthia complained that she was too slow. When Zecora cleaned a room, Cynthia found something to criticize. One afternoon, she even said, "People like you should know their place." Zecora lowered her eyes and continued working. Inside, her heart was breaking, not because Cynthia had insulted her, but because she was seeing the kind of woman her son planned to marry. Chinita still hesitated. He wanted to believe there was another explanation. Zecora knew there was only one way to end his doubt: let Cynthia reveal herself completely. The truth was closer than anyone realized. The situation became worse when Blessing came to the mansion to deliver an important company file. She recognized Zecora but did not know why she was dressed as a maid. Before she could ask, Cynthia shouted at the older woman for standing in the hallway. Blessing immediately stepped forward. "Ma, are you okay?" Cynthia snapped that the maid was lazy and useless. Blessing looked at her calmly and said, "She deserves respect like everyone else." Cynthia became furious. She told Blessing not to interfere and reminded her that she was only a secretary. Blessing did not insult her back. She simply said, "A person's position does not decide whether they deserve kindness." Chinita heard the exchange from nearby. For the first time, he saw a clear difference between the two women. Cynthia cared about status. Blessing cared about people. Still, Zecora knew the test was not finished. A person's character could be hidden when they knew they were being watched. The final test would have to be much harder, and Cynthia would have no idea that her own greed was about to expose her. That night, Zecora overheard Cynthia speaking privately with a friend. Cynthia admitted that she was pregnant, But the timing made no sense because she and Chinita had agreed to wait until marriage. She then revealed something even worse. She did not want to lose Chinita because his money was her path to the life she wanted. Her friend suggested a dangerous plan to manipulate him into believing the child was his. Cynthia agreed that she needed to act quickly. Zecora froze behind the door. She had expected arrogance, but not this level of deception. She wanted to confront Cynthia immediately, yet she knew her son needed to hear the truth himself. Later that evening, Cynthia prepared a drink for Chinita and tried to create a situation where he would be vulnerable. Zecora watched from the hallway, realizing the test had gone far beyond bad manners. This was no longer about choosing the right wife. It was about protecting her son from someone willing to destroy his future for money. She stepped forward just before Chinita could drink. The truth was closer than anyone realized. "Chinita, don't drink that." The room went silent. Cynthia stared at the maid as if she had lost her mind. Chinita looked from one woman to the other. Zecora pointed toward the glass and said she had seen Cynthia preparing it with suspicious intentions. Cynthia immediately called the older woman crazy and demanded that Chinita fire her. But Zecora refused to back down. "You have insulted me for weeks," she said, "and I stayed silent because I wanted my son to see your character for himself. But I will not stay silent while you put him in danger." Chinita's face hardened. He had heard enough. Zecora removed her maid's head covering and looked directly at Cynthia. "Now it is time for the truth." Cynthia stared in shock. Chinita whispered, "Mama?" The woman she had treated as worthless was the very person who had raised the man she planned to marry. Zecora explained the entire test. Chinita finally understood why his mother had insisted on living in the mansion. Cynthia's carefully constructed image began to collapse in front of him. The truth was closer than anyone realized. Cynthia tried to explain everything away. She claimed she had only been joking with her friend and that the suspicious conversation meant nothing. But Chinita could no longer ignore what he had heard and witnessed. She admitted that she feared losing him because she believed his wealth was the only thing that could give her the life she wanted. Chinita felt betrayed. "You said you loved me," he said. "But you were planning around my money." Cynthia cried and begged him to forgive her. She promised to change, but Chinita had finally learned the lesson his mother wanted him to understand. Love was not proven by expensive dinners, designer clothes, or beautiful words. It was proven by how someone treated people who could offer them nothing. Chinita ended the engagement and ordered Cynthia to leave. After she was gone, he sat quietly with his mother. "How did I not see it?" he asked. Zecora hugged him. "Sometimes we see what we want to see," she replied. "But the truth eventually becomes impossible to hide." Chinita was grateful, yet he was also afraid to trust anyone again. Weeks passed after Cynthia left. Chinita returned to work, but his confidence had changed. He wondered whether every person around him wanted something. Zecora told him not to let one person's betrayal make him suspicious of everyone. She reminded him of Blessing, the woman who had helped a stranger without knowing her identity. Chinita began paying attention. Blessing never asked for expensive gifts. She never tried to enter his private life. She simply worked hard and treated everyone respectfully. One morning, Chinita asked her to have coffee with him after work. Blessing looked surprised but agreed. Their first outing was simple. There was no luxury restaurant, no expensive gifts, and no crowd trying to impress anyone. Chinita noticed that Blessing was happiest when they were simply talking. She laughed at small jokes and never asked about his bank account. For the first time since Cynthia's betrayal, Chinita felt relaxed around a woman. But he still wondered, could Blessing truly love him, or was he simply seeing what he wanted to see again? Nobody in that room could forget it. Chinita decided he needed one final answer. He told Blessing that his company was facing serious financial problems. At first, he felt guilty for lying, but he believed the test would reveal the truth. Soon he announced that Evergreen Tech had collapsed after a series of bad investments. He claimed that the bank had seized his mansion and that he had lost almost everything. His friends reacted immediately. People who once called him every day suddenly stopped answering. Some said they were too busy. Others simply disappeared. Chinita watched his social circle shrink in silence. Then he called Blessing. He told her that he could no longer afford to keep her employed. Blessing was shocked by the news, but she did not blame him. "I am sorry you're going through this," she said. "If you need anything, please tell me." She did not ask for money. She did not complain about losing her job. She asked whether he had eaten. That small question struck Chinita harder than any grand speech could have. Still, he waited to see what she would do next. The truth was closer than anyone realized. Blessing came to Chinita's small apartment carrying groceries. She explained that she knew he probably had enough worries already and might forget to eat. Chinita thanked her, embarrassed that he had to accept help from someone he once considered only an employee. Blessing never treated him like a fallen rich man. She treated him like the same person she had always known. Over the next few weeks, she continued checking on him. She brought simple meals, offered ideas for rebuilding his business, and encouraged him whenever he felt hopeless. "Your skills did not disappear just because your money did," she told him. Meanwhile, Chinita's former friends continued disappearing. Even James, a man he had once considered his closest friend, refused to help. Chinita finally understood something painful. Many people had loved the lifestyle around him, not the man himself. But Blessing stayed. She had nothing to gain from staying. In fact, she was giving her own time and resources to someone she believed had lost everything. Chinita's heart began to change. For them, this was only the beginning. One evening, Blessing arrived with another bag of food. Chinita looked at her and finally asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" She hesitated, then decided there was no reason to hide anymore. She told him that she had admired him from the first day she saw him at the office. She admired his determination, his patience with employees, and the way he tried to build something useful for ordinary people. She admitted that she had never approached him because she believed she was not good enough for someone as wealthy and successful as him. "I never loved the mansion," she said. "I loved the person I saw behind the money." Chinita was stunned. He had spent weeks trying to discover whether Blessing wanted his wealth, yet she had just proven the opposite. She had stayed when there was nothing left to gain. He reached for her hand. "I was too blind to see you," he said. Blessing smiled through tears. But Chinita still had one truth left to reveal, and he knew it might change everything again. For them, this was only the beginning. And from that day forward, they chose truth instead of fear. Chinita told Blessing that he needed to confess something. The company had not actually collapsed. The apartment, the lost fortune, and the disappearance of his friends had all been part of a test. Blessing's smile disappeared. She listened without interrupting as he explained what had happened with Cynthia and why he had become afraid of trusting people. When he finished, Blessing looked hurt. "I understand why you were afraid," she said, "but you still lied to me." Chinita lowered his head. He knew she was right. He had wanted proof of her love, but in seeking that proof, he had treated her trust as something he could experiment with. "I am sorry," he said. "You deserved honesty from the beginning." Blessing did not forgive him immediately. She told him that love could not survive endless tests. Chinita promised that if she gave him another chance, he would never manipulate her again. Blessing stood silently for a long moment. Then she said, "I can forgive you, but you must understand what you almost destroyed. What happened next would prove it." And that moment changed everything. Blessing finally forgave Chinita, but she made him promise there would be no more secret tests. Chinita agreed. He wanted to rebuild their relationship on truth rather than fear. The next day, he took her somewhere special. Blessing expected another small apartment, but when the gates opened, she realized they had returned to the mansion. Everything was exactly as it had been before the supposed collapse. She stared at Chinida in disbelief. So the mansion was never gone? She asked. He shook his head. No. I needed to know who would stay when they believed it was gone. Blessing sighed. She understood the lesson, but she also reminded him that loyalty should not be forced through deception. Chinida accepted the criticism. Then he introduced her properly to his mother. Blessing froze when she recognized the older woman from the market. You? Zecora smiled. Yes. The maid you defended was me. Blessing suddenly understood why Zecora had treated her with such warmth. The test had revealed something powerful. Blessing had been kind when she believed nobody important was watching. Zecora sat with Blessing and told her the entire story of her life. She explained how she had been rejected by her parents, how she raised Chinida alone, and how she had spent years teaching him that money could never replace character. Blessing listened with tears in her eyes. She realized that the older woman had not simply been testing Cynthia. She had been protecting the son she had sacrificed everything to raise. Chinida looked at both women and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. He had spent years building a successful company, but the two people who mattered most to him had never cared about his wealth. His mother wanted his happiness. Blessing wanted his heart. Zecora smiled and told her son that she believed he had finally found the kind of woman she had prayed for. Chinida turned to Blessing. I have spent too long being afraid of losing the wrong people, he said. Now I want to build something with the right one. Blessing smiled, but before she could answer, Chinida reached into his pocket. And the next chapter was already waiting. And the next chapter was already waiting. Chinida took a small ring from his pocket. It was not the largest or most expensive ring he could have bought, because he wanted the moment to be about meaning rather than money. He looked into Blessing's eyes and said, You stood beside me when you believed I had nothing. You defended my mother when you thought she was only a maid. You gave without asking what you would receive. You showed me what loyalty looks like. He got down on one knee. Blessing, will you marry me? Blessing covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She looked at Zecora, who was already smiling, then back at Chinida. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Chinida stood and hugged her. Zecora applauded through tears. The woman who had once been rejected and thrown out of her village was now watching her son prepare to marry a woman who valued character above wealth. The journey had been painful, but every sacrifice had led to this moment. Chinida realized that the greatest thing his mother had given him was not education or opportunity. It was the ability to recognize genuine love. The wedding day arrived with joy filling the mansion. Employees returned to Evergreen Tech, and Chinida made sure those who had remained loyal during the difficult period were rewarded. Some former friends tried to return after learning that the company had never truly collapsed, but Chinida politely kept his distance. His circle was smaller now, yet he trusted the people inside it. Blessing walked down the aisle wearing a simple but beautiful dress. Chinida watched her approach with tears in his eyes. He remembered the first time he had barely noticed her at the office. He remembered how his mother had warned him that the right person might already be close. Most of all, he remembered the day Blessing stayed when everyone else believed he had nothing. When the vows were spoken, Chinida promised to love her honestly and never make her prove her worth through fear or deception. Blessing promised to stand beside him through success and struggle. Zecora watched from the front row, knowing the lonely young woman she once was had finally reached a place she never imagined. After the ceremony, Chinida found his mother standing alone near the garden. He hugged her and thanked her for everything. Zecora reminded him that she had only tried to protect the future she had sacrificed so much to build. She told him that money could disappear overnight, but a good heart was harder to replace. Chinida looked toward Blessing, who was laughing with the guests. You were right, Mama, he said. She loves me for me. Zecora smiled. Then treat her with the same loyalty she gave you. She also apologized for the tests she had encouraged. Chinita laughed softly and admitted that perhaps both of them had learned something. Blessing had passed every test, but Chinita had learned that trust could not be built by constantly testing someone. Real love required honesty. The mansion that once held arguments and suspicion now echoed with laughter. Zecora looked around and remembered the night she had been thrown out of her parents' home with nothing. She never imagined that the same woman would one day stand in a beautiful home watching her son begin a new family. On the evening after the wedding, the three of them sat together outside the mansion. Zecora told Blessing, "You are not my daughter-in-law only. You are my daughter now." Blessing held her hand and promised to love Chinita with patience and honesty. Chinita smiled as he listened. For the first time, there were no secrets between them. No disguise. No hidden test. No fear of losing everything. Just three people who had survived different kinds of pain and finally found peace together. Zecora looked at her son and remembered the baby she had once held in a tiny room while wondering how she would survive. Now that baby was a successful man with a family of his own. She whispered a prayer of gratitude. Chinita squeezed her hand and said, "Mama, you made me who I am." She shook her head. "You chose who you became." Blessing leaned against Chinita, and the three smiled. The money was valuable, but it was no longer the most important thing in the house. Love, loyalty, and truth had become the real wealth. The truth was closer than anyone realized. The truth was closer than anyone realized. The story of Zecora, Chinita, and Blessing proved that people reveal themselves when they believe nobody important is watching. Cynthia had wealth within reach, yet her greed pushed her to betray the man she claimed to love. Blessing had no guarantee of a reward, yet she continued helping someone she believed had lost everything. That difference changed Chinita's life. He had once believed money could attract the right people, but he learned that money often attracts the wrong reasons. The people who remain when comfort disappears are the ones worth keeping. He also learned that love should never be treated like a competition or an experiment. His mother's test exposed Cynthia, but Chinita's own test nearly damaged the relationship he truly wanted. In the end, they chose forgiveness, honesty, and a fresh beginning. Zecora finally saw the family she had dreamed about. Chinita found a woman who loved the man behind the wealth. Blessing found a husband who learned to trust. What happened next would prove it. And that moment changed everything. The truth was closer than anyone realized. So remember this story whenever someone enters your life and promises to love you. Watch what they do when there is nothing to gain. Watch how they treat workers, strangers, elders, and people they believe are beneath them. Watch whether they stay during difficult seasons or disappear when comfort is gone. Chinita almost married the wrong person because he listened to beautiful words. His mother protected him by looking deeper. Blessing never had to announce that she was loyal. Her actions said it for her. And Zecora's life proved that rejection does not have to be the end of a story. Sometimes the hardest chapter is simply preparing the way for a better one. She lost her family, but she gained a son who became her pride. Chinita lost a relationship, but he gained the ability to recognize real love. Blessing faced uncertainty, but she gained a partner who finally understood her worth. Their story ended not because life became perfect, but because they learned what truly mattered. If this story touched your heart, remember, money can buy comfort, but only character can build a home. In the end, Zecora stood at the doorway of the mansion and watched Chinita and Blessing walk into their new life together. She thought about the young woman she had once been, frightened and alone, carrying a baby while the world told her she had no future. She remembered the nights she cried quietly so her son would not see her pain. She remembered every small meal, every difficult job, every sacrifice, and every moment she wanted to give up but didn't. None of those tears had been wasted. Her son had grown into a man capable of learning from betrayal, admitting his mistakes, and choosing love over fear. Blessing had become the daughter she never expected. And the house that once represented wealth now represented something much greater, family. Chinita turned back and smiled at his mother. Mama, are you coming? Zecora laughed and joined them. There was no more pretending, no more testing, and no more running from the past. Only truth. Only forgiveness. Only love. Their journey had started with abandonment, but it ended with a family choosing each other every single day.